afternoon.
Good afternoon, Representative Tong. Thank you very much. Senator Doyle, Representative Rabimbis, and members of the committee, thanks for inviting me here. We've submitted written testimony on two bills today. I'm here on behalf of the criminal justice. I'm the Chief State's Attorney, as you know, and I'm here speaking on behalf of all of the 13 state's attorneys. And what I say today, this bill, the one I want to speak about primarily is 952. This is an important bill. It gives this committee an opportunity to do something very, very significant that will benefit the people in the state of Connecticut, will benefit everybody. It was done, the right things are done for the right reasons. We've got to think of what we do. All too often, criminal justice policy is set by the reaction to a problem. There's a problem, whether it be a horrible crime, and all of a sudden people are asking for mandatory minimums and 3 strikes and you're outlaws, and bringing back the death penalty, and the legislature does something, and then later on that causes other consequences that were not foreseen, and all of a sudden a new problem comes up. I'm suggesting, I lost track. Each one of you in your own district has a state's attorney who's a state's attorney for your judicial district. They're too busy, they can't be here today. Every one of them would like to. I would suggest that each one of you call your state's attorney. They'd love to talk to you. They'd be happy to talk to you. They could give you a perception that would be helpful for you in considering when you're making these decisions, because they see what happens day to day. They see the decisions they're confronted with because of the statutes that you're inclined to act. One of the principal things that I think has brought this issue to the forefront today is not the public health issue that use of drugs is really abuse and addiction to narcotics is at the core a public health problem, a very serious public health problem that's leading to a whole lot of other tragic problems in our communities, no matter where those communities be, whether it's the cities or the suburbs or the rural parts of Connecticut. It's a huge public health problem, and, well, huge, we have other public health problems too. It's a big public health problem. The idea that we are filling up the prisons, or really putting anybody in prison, just because they possess a narcotic substance is an erroneous idea. You have statistics, Scott Semple, who's very good, very, very capable, very honest, and has loads of integrity, is a wonderful man. I said we have 500 people in prison now on narcotics-related offenses. Those people in there, if those are the numbers, and I give them credit, they may well be, I don't know that they're solely limited to possession of narcotics. I doubt that they are. If they are, almost every one of those is somebody whose charges were reduced to possession because a prosecutor wanted to give that person a break, and reduced a sale charge or a possession with intent to sell charge to possession. Furthermore, and what we're looking at is what to do after incarceration, drug rehabilitation in incarceration, early release from incarceration into drug treatment programs. That's a good idea. That's very important. Corrections has made remarkable progress in doing that. But what happens on the people who do go there on drug charges is years ago we enacted a whole series of diversionary programs, pre-trial diversionary programs. Prosecutors don't want to send drug addicts or drug abusers to prison. People are arrested and charged with possession of sale, even dealers, even low-level drug dealers who were dealing, but they're also addicted. Prosecutors would much rather get them treated and get them cured and enable them to get employment, get jobs, get health, take care of their families. We don't want to see kids raised by drug-addicted parents who then can't get through school past 5th grade. We'd much rather see those people be treated, and prison isn't the answer for those people. They come to court the first time, we recommend pretrial diversion programs. There are 15 of them. Read our written testimony about the number. What happens on those, unfortunately, there's no real consequences. A person comes in, applies for a diversionary program, the case is automatically continued. There's no admission of guilt. There's no plea of guilty. The case is continued for, it can be a year, maybe even 2 years. I don't remember. During that time, they're supposedly placed under the supervision of the Department of Adult Probation, and hopefully they get into some kind of drug treatment program. The degree to which those programs are successful, if they were successful, a lot of these people wouldn't come back to court. They're coming back again and again to court, and finally some of them maybe do go to jail. We need to look at this system as a whole, in context, and find ways to do this. The time to avoid sending people to prison is before they're convicted the first time. That's what these programs are designed to do. That's the way they should work. If you look at the prison population and ask yourselves, or ask somebody from ORR to do the research, I think maybe there are ways to get these answers. Find somebody, take a representative sample of the people in prison on narcotics-related charges and get their true history. How many times are they arrested? How many diversionary programs did they get? What happened in the course of their diversionary programs? Why couldn't those diversionary programs have been made more successful? Had they been, they would have avoided a conviction in the first place, would have avoided incarceration entirely. We've got to step back and look at the system in context and not fix one part here because there's a great financial need and ignore the beginning. Our resources are concentrated in odd ways here, and the way the resources are concentrated are in response to an immediate problem that seems to need those resources without looking at the overall problem and the overall picture. There may be a very good reason to reduce the penalties to misdemeanors. As I said, it's a public health problem. Who wants to give people felony convictions for that? The consequences of this, think about it a little bit. It's important if people are convicted and put on probation that they be given adequate time and adequate supervision, and sometimes having something hanging over their head with a threat that if they don't comply, if they don't do this, then they're going to face consequences which they may not like. The period of probation on a misdemeanor is 2 years. It can be extended by the court to 3 years if appropriate, and that's usually only when probation officers ask to extend it to 3 years. If somebody's on probation, violates their probation, the probation department has to choose to treat him as a violator, him or her, and then apply for an arrest warrant. That takes a while. An arrest warrant's applied for, issued, the person comes in. If this other bill that's passed that the division's against restricts judges to set bond at no more than $5,000 on a misdemeanor, most of those people would be let out on a written promise to appear, or they'll make bond, and they'll be out with their addiction still intact. And is that the appropriate vehicle to provide supervision? At least if it's a felony, there's more supervision. Now, I'm not saying it should be a felony. That's a decision people need to make. It's a public policy decision. I hate to see penalties and people being put in prison because they're addicted to drugs, and prosecutors do too. But we've got to find a solution, and we can't be just reacting to the perceived and I think erroneous impression that we're spending too much money on corrections because too many people are in there because they have drug problems. Think of the other things too with regard to the drug section. Do we really want to treat possession of heroin and possession of cocaine the same way we treat possession of half an ounce of marijuana? What is heroin? What is it doing to people? Look at the heroin deaths we've had in the past couple of years. The escalation of deaths due to overdose of heroin. We're now prescribing and allowing people to administer drugs to prevent that. Police officers are trained. The pharmacists are, and there are some issues with regard to that. Well, that's a tragedy. Nobody should die of these drugs. But are we responding to this drug problem right? I don't know. Back in the 70s, when you look at what states have done over the years, you can see this crazy pendulum go from one extreme to the other. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, everybody decided to have harsh penalties on drugs. Other states did it, and then we're doing it. Now we're hearing other states are doing this, and therefore we should do it. The question is, does it really work? In those days, we had serious penalties for possession and sale of narcotics. We also had a statute permitting suspension of prosecution. We had many drug treatment programs. There's some drug treatment programs around the state. I remember Daytop. I remember a clinic here in Hartford called McCook Hospital, where we would suspend prosecution and have people committed to those programs. Did they work? Did they solve it? A lot of those people came back with other offenses. A lot of the problems with heroin and cocaine is that people addicted are doing other crimes to support their habit, or doing other crimes because they can't hold a job or make a living, or they need to commit other crimes. A few years ago, Hayes and Kazimierz committed a horrendous crime. They were drug addicts. That the problem wasn't solved, and they're not the only ones who get into problems like that. We have to look at this, and I would rather have you start with the diversionary programs, find a way to get better resources to make those diversionary programs work, get these people out of the court system before they tie up more resources. It would be good to see if they could come in the door very early on in the first few weeks. There was a way to get these people into some kind of effective program that would likely have a good outcome, where we could hear quickly if there were failures and responses, and get these people into those programs and out of court in the first few weeks of the court, in the first few weeks after their arrest, and not do the process we have now. I'd ask you to please look at this as a whole. This is an opportunity. If we fix a little problem here, and we think we fixed it, and we haven't, it's just going to be a bigger problem in a few years, and that's what we've seen in an awful lot of issues in our criminal justice policy over the years. We respond to one problem, don't really fix it, and 10 years later or 5 years later, we have a bigger problem that has to be addressed. We try to fix that, go back to the other way. Now, with regard to the part, and I don't want to speak too long, and you've all had a lot of good questions, I'd be glad to try to answer. With regard to the pardons and parole issues.
From my perspective, basically this legislation would, if I'm caught with 2 pounds of a certain drug, I basically would be a misdemeanor. That's how I look at it. And I kind of agree. Later on you spoke. The current system is, there's the impression of this bill and others that if you get arrested with a certain amount of possession of a drug, you immediately go to prison, you're in prison for life. And the reality is, of the court system, the prosecutors we have legislative drug programs that people get second and third chances, and that's not the intent of this bill. Doesn't reflect the reality of the court system, I think. I don't know, do you agree with my...
No, I agree that it doesn't reflect the reality of the court system, but it also misses something that's important. The question is, do those diversionary programs work the way the legislature had hoped they would when they initially set them up? Why is it that people are almost being processed through diversionary program after diversionary program and then end up in prison? Why is that happening? Are those diversionary programs, are they administered in a way that can produce the benefit that we would like them to have? There are many people who get arrested, charged with a crime, and you can talk to them on the first day and say, this person isn't going to come back. He realized he did something stupid. He realized he got caught doing this. He's embarrassed. His parents are upset with him. He knows what it's... And you can nolly those cases on the first day, and we often should. One of the problems is we're so doggone busy right now, we don't have enough of us. We look at a case quickly, there's a diversionary program, we'll let them go through that without having to make the hard decision. We're putting a lot of people in those diversionary programs who don't need it. The people who do need it need more than those diversionary programs are able to provide. As a result of that, we're cycling people, just processing people through diversionary maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and they finally get convicted. And then they get a suspended sentence and probation, and then they come back again, and maybe again, and then they go to prison. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening. We're getting certain segments of chronic low-level offenders, and we're just churning them. And then all of a sudden they end up in prison with a sentence hanging over their head because there's nothing else has worked, nothing else has happened. And it's expensive. And it seems harsh. And in many cases it is harsh. But that's what I'm saying. We've got to look at the system better. Now, with regard to this bill, this is a good start. My suggestion is you think a little bit hard whether you want to treat heroin and cocaine like we treat more than half an ounce of marijuana. If you do, I think you ought to extend the period of probation for those drug charges instead of 2, with an ability of the court to make it 3. to consider doing something with the probationary periods, because addiction is a horrible thing. People who, and this is one of the things, you know, if somebody's addicted, they get convicted of a crime, possession, they get put on probation, don't use it again. People are going to fall off the wagon. Alcoholics fall off the wagon. During the process of being cured, addicts are going to fall off the wagon. But they need to have a sense that they're, you know, a reason and a motivation that they darn well better change. So we've got to have a process that deals with this addiction better, and we haven't done that well in the past. Those old programs are gone. Daytop, I don't know how well they worked in the past. They didn't seem to be. We thought they worked, but they didn't seem to. But the answer to this, if the motivation for this bill is because it'll save money on corrections, that's not right. There are cases that we now reduce normally from possession with intent to sell to possession, or from sale to possession. We reduce those normally, sometimes requiring a prison sentence. We won't be able to reduce a lot of those charges if they're misdemeanors. That'll enhance the reduction. It's a question of trying to hit the right balance. That's hard to do. If you do that, and I don't know what the answer is, whether the answer is this really is a health issue and an issue that you need some conscious thought about. Do we want to treat heroin and marijuana that way? Should we change the penalty? But with regard to the parole section, the parole and pardons, that's people do need second chances. We recommend often granting pardons. We recommend not infrequently letting people out early to do that. Just set up procedural standards that the board's going to have to follow, and change the suitability standards for release. We attempted to do that in the juvenile sentencing bill by changing this. The purposes of sentencing are set forth in 54-300C of the general statutes. This legislature did that back in 2010. The wording of it may actually covers the purposes of sentencing very well. Consider using that or something like that as a standard that the Board of Parole and Pardons must follow in deciding who to grant parole to and pardons. I'm sorry, I promised I talked enough and I'm talking too long again.
All
Sorry.
Right. Through you, Mr. Chairman. So your premise is that the current drug programs really may not be too effective in terms of actually solving the person's drug problem, but I think in the premise of this legislation, I think, is probably to treat people and avoid the criminal records. But if this were to pass, wouldn't it just be then, assuming they're minimized, that the charges are minimized, and a person doesn't have a record, there's no chance for treatment? Then, in theory, they get out quickly and they go back on the street and then take drugs again. You're identifying, yes, we should try to improve the effectiveness of our drug programs, but this legislation would just minimize it, slap in the wrist. Correct me if I'm wrong, then I think it's a revolving door. They're going back in and there's no chance for treatment. When I think people are looking for true treatment for people that aren't dealers, that are just have the problem. I'm not sure this approach really addresses it. I don't know if you agree or not.
I don't think this approach does, no. I think the approach that would do it much better is to put some teeth in the pretrial, consolidate the pretrial diversionary programs, and we can work on language to do that, to enable us, when prosecutors, when cases first come in, to put them in those diversionary programs. There's some reasonable hope that they'll succeed in getting people rehabilitated and improving the drugs and getting out without any conviction at all. And then you wouldn't need so much prison at the end of the line. You wouldn't need to be thinking about pardons, because there wouldn't be convictions. The old statute that allowed suspension of prosecution did it for that purpose, but it didn't really work. It moved the cases out of the docket. We're great at finding ways to move business and getting it out of the court system and putting it in a diversionary program, and the person will come back in 6 months and saying, well, I didn't get it arrested again, and the case is dismissed. But is that the outcome? Maybe the person, did that really help the person? Well, it didn't. It didn't. I would like you to take, if we're talking about drugs, find a way to deal with this right from the time of arrest, and move resources there, and move some teeth there, and accountability there, to get people. What you want to do is avoid the second arrest. What you want to do is avoid the conviction. What you want to do is avoid sending the person to prison. And if indeed it is a drug addiction and abuse problem, which is a health problem, then let's be able to put some teeth in the front end of the system with some resources to avoid having to get to prison and to avoid the conviction and to avoid the need for the problem. And to maybe do it in the community if that's possible, if there are in fact good community drug treatment programs. And if there are, to find the ones that work and find ones where the prosecutors can really know if somebody's failing and know early on enough to maybe to impose an earlier sanction, to raise the bail for a while, for instance, and then reduce the bail and let them go back into the program, to be able to do things quickly. Violation of probation really is not a good tool. Probation is really not a good tool to supervise people with that kind of a problem. Parole might be better because parole could put somebody back in immediately and then let them out very quickly. With probation violations, by the time they go in, too much time has passed. Parole, the advantage is you can violate somebody, have them go in for a week, and then get back in the program and say, keep going, or next time it'll be longer, and you can impose some sanctions which maybe lead to treatment. That's a theory I have. I'm not a medical person. It's not the best, but that's a theory that uses well somewhere. But I think you have to look at this as a whole and not just try to fix a problem at the end that doesn't solve the overall problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.